Hi everyone, welcome back to my class. This is Rumana Ali. I hope you all are doing well. In the last session, I have explained you about the mechanism of breathing. Breathing involves two steps, expiration and inspiration, that we can also call as exhalation and inhalation. So the mechanism of exhalation and inhalation involves the movement of diaphragm and ribs. The diaphragm and the ribs, they show some movement due to the contraction of the different muscles and due to the movement of ribs and diaphragm. The mechanism of inhalation and exhalation would take place. So now the next step is our exchange of gases. How the exchange of gases takes place, let us see. So we all know from the beginning, I am telling you that oxygen from the atmosphere, it enters into the lungs and then it enters into the alveoli of the lungs, which are sac-like structure. Now the alveoli is rich in oxygen, and one more thing that we need to remember is the air or the gases, they always moves from higher concentration to lower concentration. So here the oxygen concentration is more, so it is going to move into the blood. When the oxygen moves, when the oxygen transfer into the blood, then this blood, which is first deoxygenated, here the CO2, carbon dioxide is more. Now the carbon dioxide from the blood, it enters into the alveoli, and the oxygen from the alveoli, it enters into the blood. Once the blood is rich in oxygen, then we can name that blood as oxygenated blood, right? So this oxygenated blood, first it is going to transfer into the left atrium and left ventricle, and from there the heart pumps this oxygenated blood into the different organs of our body. Once the different organs receives this oxygenated blood, they takes up the oxygen from the blood, they use that oxygen to produce ATP, and after the consumption of oxygen from the blood by the different cells, again the blood becomes deoxygenated. That means again the concentration of CO2 gets increases, it becomes high in the blood, and whenever the concentration of carbon dioxide is high in the blood, we call that blood as deoxygenated blood, right? So this is how the exchange of gases takes place, and whenever we are learning, we are studying about the exchange of gases, we need to remember their concentration as well. So the concentration of different gases, it is termed as pressure. We all know that air is a mixture of gases. Only oxygen is not going to enter into the body, but the combination of gases is going to take up by our body, it is going to enter into our body. So here the combination of gases, like for example, if O2 is present in the air, nitrogen is present, and carbon dioxide is also present in the mixture, that is in the atmospheric air. Whenever the combination of gases are present, when we find the combination of different gases in the air, then the concentration of gases can be termed as their partial pressure. The gases are present in a combination, only O2 is not present in the air. In addition to this O2, many other gases like nitrogen and carbon dioxide is also present in the air, and whatever the concentration of these gases are present, we measure that concentration by using the word called partial pressure. So if we are talking about the pressure of oxygen, the concentration of oxygen, then we need to use partial pressure, PP. PP is nothing but partial pressure, it stands for partial pressure. The maximum partial pressure of the oxygen, minimum partial pressure of all the gases in a combination, it is given as 40 mmHg. mmHg, millimeter mercury, is a unit that we use to measure the partial pressure of the different gases. So all these gases that are present in the air, they have minimum partial pressure as 40 mmHg. It is a constant value of the partial pressure of different gases that are present in a combination. The next one is if we talk about one gas, that is carbon dioxide, then minimum partial pressure of the carbon dioxide will be the same as that of oxygen, that is it will be 40 mmHg. But the maximum PP, maximum partial pressure of carbon dioxide will be 45 mmHg. It will not exceed the range 45. So 45 mmHg is the maximum partial pressure of carbon dioxide. Now let us see the different concentration of gases at the time of their exchange. So at the time of gaseous exchange also we can find the different partial pressure. We all know that alveoli, it will be rich in oxygen. After inhalation, the air which enters into the alveoli, it supplies oxygen into it. So the concentration of the oxygen is high in the alveoli. Let us take 140. So it is given as 140 mmHg of oxygen is present in the alveoli. But when you see the deoxygenated blood, the concentration of carbon dioxide is high. So just before I told you that maximum partial pressure of carbon dioxide will be 45. So here, as the high concentration of carbon dioxide is present in the deoxygenated blood, we can write its concentration as 45 mmHg. Now the exchange starts. What happens? From the deoxygenated blood, the carbon dioxide is high in concentration. So it is going to move towards the low concentration, towards the region where the concentration of carbon dioxide is low. So the carbon dioxide gas is moved into the alveoli. Once it reaches the alveoli, it becomes 40 mmHg. That means low concentration of carbon dioxide. But here the blood requires oxygen, and we know that high concentration of oxygen is present in the alveoli. So it is going to move into the blood. We have seen that 140 mmHg of oxygen is present in the alveoli. So it is going to be transferred. It is going to supply it to the blood, and the concentration of oxygen will become 95 mmHg. In such a way, the gases always moves from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration. The maximum partial pressure of oxygen will be 140 mmHg and the minimum partial pressure of oxygen will be 40 mmHg. And likewise, the partial pressure of carbon dioxide, minimum partial pressure of carbon dioxide will always be 40 mmHg, and the maximum partial pressure of carbon dioxide will always be 45 mmHg. It doesn't exceed this value. Now I'll make a table for better understanding about the partial pressure of the different gases. Now let us see the values. Let us see how many millimeter mercury of the different gases are found in these different parts in the process of respiration. So when we talk about the partial pressure of oxygen, then it will be high in alveoli, and the value is given as 104. So 104 mmHg of oxygen is found in alveoli. But when we see the concentration of oxygen in deoxygenated blood, then the minimum partial pressure of oxygen is, that is 40. Minimum partial pressure of all the gases will always be 40. So here the oxygen is present in a lesser amount. Therefore, the partial pressure of oxygen is 40 in deoxygenated blood. But when you see the concentration, the partial pressure of oxygen in oxygenated blood, then it will be 95. But again, the oxygen concentration is less in the deoxygenated tissues. So due to the inavailability of oxygen in the deoxygenated tissues, the minimum partial pressure of oxygen, that is 40 mmHg of oxygen, is found in deoxygenated tissues. Now let us see the range, the concentration or the partial pressure of carbon dioxide. So in the alveoli, low concentration of carbon dioxide is present, that is minimum partial pressure 40. And in the deoxygenated blood, As the oxygen is not present in the higher concentration, carbon dioxide will be present in a higher concentration. They are inversely proportional. The partial pressure of both these gases are inversely proportional in the process of respiration. So, as the minimum partial pressure of oxygen is found in the deoxygenated blood, the maximum partial pressure of carbon dioxide is found in this deoxygenated blood. But when you see the oxygenated blood, then minimum partial pressure, minimum low concentration of carbon dioxide is found, that is 40. In the deoxygenated tissues, again the minimum partial pressure of oxygen is present. So, that means opposite thing is going to happen here, that here minimum partial pressure of oxygen, so it will be maximum partial pressure of carbon dioxide. So, in this way the different partial pressure of the different gases can be seen during the gaseous exchange process in our life process, that is respiration. Now, let us learn about gaseous exchange surface. We know that the functional unit of lungs is our alveoli. So, in the alveoli oxygen is present. This oxygen is going to enter into the blood capillaries. Blood vessels are of three types: arteries, veins and blood capillaries. Only the blood capillaries are responsible for exchange of material. If any material needs to get exchanged, then only the blood capillaries can be used. The blood capillaries can carry out the function of exchange of different materials. So, from the alveoli, the oxygen enters into the blood capillaries where the deoxygenated blood is present. That means the oxygen is not present in an enough amount. So, it needs to be entered into our blood capillaries. So, in the blood capillaries, CO2 is present, carbon dioxide is present. So, this carbon dioxide needs to move into the alveoli. In this way, exchange of gases takes place. But through what these gases are getting exchanged? Through what? They are going to enter into the different structures. How these gaseous exchange is happening? So, it is because of the cells that are arranged at the wall of the alveoli. So, alveoli is made up of different cells, but the wall of alveoli is made up of thin cells, and these thin cells are called as squamous epithelial cell, or we can name it as squamous epithelium. So, squamous epithelial cells are arranged at the wall of alveolus, and at this wall again a membranous structure is present like this. A membrane is present at the wall of alveoli. This membrane is named as basement membrane. And when you see the blood capillaries are also made up of different cells. Again, the walls of blood capillaries are made up of thin cells. These thin cells are called as squamous epithelial cells again. So, the wall of both alveoli and the blood capillaries are made up of thin cells. We call these cells as squamous epithelial cell. But the squamous epithelial cells of the blood capillaries is named by the different word. So, which word we use to name the squamous epithelial cells of the blood capillaries? We call these cells as endothelium. The cells which are present at the walls of blood capillaries, they are thin, they are called as endothelium, and the cells which are present at the wall of alveolus, they are named as squamous epithelium or squamous epithelial cells. The oxygen is present in the alveoli, it needs to enter into the blood capillaries. So, the exchange of gases takes place through three surfaces. And one more point, at the walls of the blood capillaries endothelium is present. This endothelium is covered by a membrane, and again this membrane is termed as basement membrane only. So, the membranous structure that is found at the walls of both alveolus and the blood capillaries, it is termed as basement membrane. And the main important feature of basement membrane is it is non-cellular. It is not made up of different cells. Only one membrane, one continuous membrane is found. That membrane is called as basement membrane. Now let us see, layers are present at the surface for the exchange of gases. So for the process of gaseous exchange, 3 layers are found. First one is squamous epithelium of the alveoli. The second one is basement membrane, which is present at the walls of both alveoli and blood capillaries. And the third layer for the process of gaseous exchange is our endothelium. So these 3 layers are very important for the transport of oxygen into the blood capillaries and the transport of carbon dioxide from the blood capillaries into the alveolus. So these 3 layers are important: squamous epithelium, basement membrane and endothelium. So we have seen the different concentration of the different gases. We have seen how the gaseous exchange takes place because of the presence of different layers. Now we'll talk about the transport of oxygen. From the beginning, we are learning that alveoli helps in transporting the oxygen. This oxygen reaches the blood capillary, and the carbon dioxide from the blood capillary is going to transport it into the alveoli. But once the oxygen from the alveoli enters into the blood capillary, it is not going anywhere. It will be found in our blood capillaries only till it reaches the different cells or the different tissues. So how it happens? What are the different things that are found in the blood that are responsible to bind the oxygen? Blood has 2 components. One is plasma and the other one is cells. So plasma is almost equal to that of water, only some proteins are found in the plasma. So the liquid composition of the blood is our plasma. Some proteins can be found in the plasma. Now cells are of different types like red blood cells, white blood cells and platelets. In the process of transport of oxygen, only the red blood cells are playing major role. So we are going to talk about one type of blood cell, that is red blood cell. Plasma is present in the blood and the cells are present. We are just talking about the red blood cells here that helps in the transport of oxygen. So this is our red blood cell. Now the plasma is almost equal to that of water, but the oxygen that enters into the blood capillary, it is not completely soluble in this watery liquid. It's a basic thing that oxygen is not much soluble in liquids. So what happens? Out of 100% of oxygen that is transported from the alveoli into the blood capillary, only 3% of oxygen will be soluble in the plasma. Remaining 97% of the oxygen is taken up by this red blood cell. And inside the red blood cell, some components are present, and that components are helping in binding this oxygen molecule. In the red blood cells, some substances are present, some pigments are found that helps in binding the oxygen. Once it binds the oxygen cannot leave the blood capillaries and it cannot go somewhere else. So the components that are present, the substances that are present in the red blood cells, they are called as hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is responsible to bind the oxygen. 97% of the oxygen can takes up by the red blood cells. It is going to bind to the hemoglobin. So hemoglobin, if you see the structure of one hemoglobin, then it will be like 4 heme groups are present in one hemoglobin, and these 4 heme groups shows the presence of a metal, that is iron. So inside the heme groups, iron metal is found, and at the surface of all these 4 heme groups, some chain like structure is present, and we call this chain as globin, and it is made up of protein. So proteinaceous chain is found, and we name this chain as globin. So 4 heme groups are found and globin proteins. Globin proteinaceous chains are found. This is what the structure of the hemoglobin. Now the oxygen molecules, one oxygen molecule can bind to the one heme group of hemoglobin. So if this is again the structure of hemoglobin, heme groups, iron metal, proteinaceous globin chains. One oxygen molecule can bind to one heme group. Likewise, one hemoglobin is required for 4 oxygen molecules to bound. 4 oxygen molecules can bind, 4 oxygen atoms can bind to one hemoglobin. This is how the binding of oxygen to the hemoglobin takes place, and it will not leave the oxygen anywhere else. So the oxygen, after the alveoli transport the oxygen into the blood capillaries, it is going to bind to the hemoglobin, and hemoglobin carries the oxygen in the blood. But when the tissues require oxygen, at that time the oxygen leaves the heme group of the hemoglobin, and it can easily enter or it can be transported to the different tissues of our body in order to produce ATP, in order to form ATP, that is energy molecule. So this is what happens in the blood capillaries by the red blood cells. Once will recall this one. Oxygen is not much soluble in liquids. So blood, it is having 2 components, plasma, watery, and cells are found. Red blood cells, white blood cells and platelets are found. Red blood cells plays a major role in the transport of oxygen. So here 3% of oxygen is dissolved in plasma, remaining 97% of oxygen can be transported by the red blood cells. In the red blood cells, some important substances are present, and they are called as, compounds are present, they are called as hemoglobin. One hemoglobin shows 4 heme group. Inside the heme group, iron metal is present, and at the surface of all these 4 heme groups, globin proteinaceous chain is present. This is the structure of hemoglobin. To each heme group, one molecule of oxygen can attach. This is how the binding of oxygen with that of the hemoglobin takes place, and once the oxygen is bound by the hemoglobin, it is present, it is found in the blood capillaries. But when the tissues require oxygen, at that time the oxygen leaves the hemoglobin, leaves the heme group of the hemoglobin, and they can enter into the tissues. That oxygen is utilized by the tissues to form ATP, to form energy molecule. This is about the transport of oxygen, and this way the oxygen transport can takes place. So that's all for today. Meet you in next class. Thank you.